It's Des,
It's deep.
and you're listening to It's Really That Deep.
We have takes on everything we are watching.
Today, we're going to get into Sinners, a 2025 American supernatural horror film written and directed by Ryan Coogler. It stars Michael B. Jordan, Mumi Mosako, Haley Steinfeld, Miles Caton, Jack O'Connell, Delroy Lindo, and more. Sinners was released in April 2025. Trying to leave their troubled lives behind, twin brothers return to their hometown to start again, only to discover that an even greater evil is waiting for them to come back.
So why are we discussing Sinners? It's the most talked about movie of the year. So far, its themes of black ownership, assimilation, religion, passing privilege, allyship, solidarity, and the diaspora are exactly within our considerations.
First off, Dee, what background did you have of the movie going in?
I only had a little bit of background because I saw my various favorite feminist YouTubers complaining about the depiction of women in the movie. I did do my best to avoid that dialogue though, because I wanted to form my own decision. And I do remember seeing the dialogue around Ryan Coogler's deal with Warner Brothers and also some, let's say, bad mind from various white magazine editors and such, making claims about that the fact that it's not successful, even though it has been very successful. But apart from that, nothing else. What about you?
I knew that Ryan Coogler was teaming up with his fave Michael B. Jordan, who is low-key my op on a vampire movie since last year. I knew Wumi Mosaku, who I love from Lovecraft Country, was going to be in it. I didn't know what kind of vampire movie it was going to be, how much they were going to lean into the supernatural bit or not. And I intentionally stayed away from spoilers. I did know by the time I was going to watch it in the cinemas that it was extremely buzzy. It had been well received by Black viewers in particular and by critics. And I actually watched it for the first time in Lagos, in Nigeria, in IMAX. D, was Sinners bad, good, or mid?
It was good. It was definitely good. Very entertaining, a broad range of themes, lots to think about. I love a movie that will make me think, so I was really impressed by it. And great music. I've been listening to the music since I watched it. What about you? What did you think?
Definitely good. Sinners ultimately works for me, even though I have some critiques of it, because it simultaneously entertained me in the cinema and, like you said, it made me think. I think that the entire cast feels committed to the movie. Its aesthetics are very distinctive. I thought the cinematography was fantastic and the music works really well. I also think the character of Sammy is believable and is performed very well. And it's very important for that to be done for this whole movie to work. So ultimately, the film works for me and it's a good film. I do have many critiques of it. We'll get into that. Out of 10, what would you give Sinners?
I would say it was a solid 8 for me.
8?
It was an 8 for me. Honestly,
Eight?
I have my critiques. I was thinking about would I give it a 7.5 or an 8. I'm leaning towards 8, but
I'm
yeah,
genuinely shocked to hear that. I thought you liked this movie less than me. I wouldn't
yeah.
give Sinners more than a 7. So that's so
Okay.
interesting to me. I thought I liked the movie more than you.
So what's the reason for the 7?
I have a lot of concerns with the thematic discipline in the movie. This is always a problem I
Mm-hmm.
have with Ryan Coogler. It's not unique to Sinners. The movie has a lot of ideas it's trying to juggle, and many of them are
Yeah.
interesting, but it's not disciplined in how it's articulating and exploring them.
Mm-hmm.
I also have some issues with some of the more corny or
Mm.
cliche one liners that are in some parts of the film. Again, it is a staple thing in Ryan Coogler movies and Michael B. Jordan movies. And this is the least I've actually seen them do it in all of their collaborations so far. But they are still present and
Mm-hmm.
they do irk me a bit. So that's another reason why I have to snatch a few points.
So for me, my biggest critique was I didn't love Act One at all. In fact, I started to disconnect from the movie. Like you said, it felt undisciplined. But over time, what pulled it back for me was that in the final 2 acts, I was on the edge of my seat. I was like, I want to know what's going on. I was thoroughly entertained. I loved the music of it all. I do have my own critiques as well, which I'm sure we'll get into. But overall, I think it was a strong movie. It's something I've watched twice now. I'd happily watch it again.
Same. It is a movie that rewards rewatching or rediscussing. It's not thin. It
Mm-hmm.
has lots of detail that you can enjoy and more
Mm-hmm.
detail that you enjoy with time. And the music is such a crucial bit of that
Yeah.
because first time you watch it, it's the first time you're hearing the music and it's fun. But if you watch it again when some of the music has settled into you, you have the moments to look forward to, you know, some of
Exactly.
the lines. It adds an additional layer to the enjoyment of the experience. Let's talk about the narrative of the movie. Let's start with Act One. So with
Mm-hmm.
Act One, twins Smoke and Stack arrive in their Mississippi hometown. They go about recruiting from their community to open a juke joint. What was going through your mind as you watched the first act of Sinners?
I'll be honest, I was quite depressed. Let me explain why, right? The reality is, as a black person and also as a descendant of slaves, right? I don't love being reminded all the time about this dark period in history. I'm willing to do it. For example, I think Sinners did it in a good way, you know. But in the beginning, I thought, where are they going with this? I don't want to be forced to watch trauma porn. So I was worried, and also the pacing didn't help for Act One. Like I said, I disconnected from the movie in the beginning. I was about to give up on it. Yeah, that entire process of going around to collect all of the people who would ultimately be key characters in the juke joint, it took far too long for me, and I think Ryan Coogler could have been a bit more disciplined with that section. What do you think?
I totally disagree. Act one
Mm.
works very, very, very well for me. It might be my favorite part of the movie. Combination of Act one
Wow.
and two. I really do disagree. Both the first time I watched it in the IMAX theater and when I watched it again from home,
Mm-hmm.
I recall when I first watched the movie and the opening sequence begins with Annie describing the mythology of these
Mm-hmm.
people that can sing to different generations. It locked me in immediately and I was like, I'm sat.
Mm.
And that tone of mysticism and the past and history, I was sucked in from that first shot and it held my attention in that way throughout. I am a person that doesn't have the most patience in the world for Michael B.
Mm.
Jordan. And yet, when they first saw the first shot of Stack and Smoke standing beside their car before they meet up with the clan Grand Dragon who sells them the juke joy, I felt like I was watching a, you know, blockbuster popcorn moment in the
Mm-hmm.
best way. I was tapped in. When you start seeing them going through the Delta and seeing their old friends or frenemies, I know what you mean. That seeing that imagery of Black people so close to slavery is imagery you've seen a bunch of times before, and it can be very depressing. In this situation, it didn't feel depressing to me. The anticipation of we're getting the gang together to create
Mm.
something for us, it worked for me. I also was very excited to see Wumi Mosaku. I loved her in Lovecraft Country, which was also a fantasy supernatural horror show that involved the stories of Black people. I had
Mm.
less excitement when they introduced Mary, but that's because I have some issues with that whole character. I thought
Yeah.
the fact that we don't see Remmick until almost, I think, 35 minutes into this movie. I know for a lot of people it didn't work. It worked perfectly well for me. The first time we see him, he literally jumps into the shot from above and then
Mm-hmm.
he runs up into the clan member's house, asking them to let him in. And they stupidly let him in. And even when the indigenous vampire hunters come and say, allow us save your life, and
Mm-hmm.
they still refuse. I love that entire villain introduction. It all kind of worked for me.
I just felt like we spent so much time doing the kind of storyboarding and getting the characters together. By the time we're introduced to Remmick, I was kind of like, okay, what now? Like, you just throwing this in here. I just think that it took too long. The movie basically starts at 20 minutes in.
I don't agree. Some
Yeah.
of the best cinematography of this movie is in that first act. In fact, in
Agreed.
the first 10 minutes or so, when you see
Mm-hmm.
Sammy walking up to his father's church and the dad is going, Sammy, drop down that guitar. I thought that was some of the most beautiful shots of the film. And some of those overhead shots of Smoke, Sack, Sammy, and Delta Slim when they're driving down the roads and Delta Slim is reminiscing. To me, those moments just work. I think this is one of those things about art. It either just works for you or it doesn't work.
Mm-hmm.
So in the second act, basically, what happens is that on the opening night of the Duke Joint, Sammy's music unknowingly summons spirits. So
Mm-hmm.
Remmick and his vampire troupe are summoned to the area. Mary goes out of the Duke Joint. She's turned by Remmick. She then infiltrates the joint by going back in. How did you feel about those scenes?
Act two was the strongest for me by far. I loved it. There were just so many different themes going on. What I loved the most about it was, and I guess this is one of the core themes of the movie, it was the hope that, as we discussed, you have Black people in a very tricky time in history being beaten down, and you have these two twins who, yes, they're dodgy, but they are bringing something which is very much needed, which is hope. That we want to have somewhere where we can convene as Black people under the struggle, but still convene as Black people and just have a night to enjoy and have fun. And I really did enjoy seeing the buzz that was created in the town. And obviously, the twins have a reputation which is well known. Even the source of their money is questionable, and that's mentioned a few times in the movie. But they've decided to, at least on the surface, use that money to bring other people in, basically, and give them jobs, for, even if it's just for the day. We also get to know more about their love stories with Mary and Wunmi's character, which is Annie. What I will say is, I did find it interesting to see how this movie tries to distinguish between the two twins, and they kind of use their romantic relationships as a way to do that. And it's probably the most effective way that they did that for me in the film.
Mm.
So I know that a lot of people, I saw a lot of people saying that they were really able to understand who was Smoke and who was Stack. I didn't. I really was struggling until I started to see how the various men were interacting with
Wait,
the women.
wait. Is that a shot at Michael B. Jordan's
It's
acting
absolutely
skills?
a show. Yeah, it is a show. Because I think at one point I was relying on the red hat blue hat thing, so when the hats were gone I was struggling, I was fighting for my life, like who's talking right now. But yeah, jokes aside, I do think he did an overall good job. I just think it was a very hard thing to pull off, and unfortunately for them, I was watching this at the same time as I was watching Severance. And if you watch Severance, you'll know that the actors were skillful in displaying two very different characters, and he just wasn't on that level, in my opinion.
I also like Act Two a lot. I have issues with it towards the end, but for me, the most important thing about Act Two is the music. The movie opens with Sammy. Even in the first act, you have scenes where Smoke and Stark are asking him to sing for them. But then when we get to Act Two, when they are in the Juke and he starts performing, I had chills that ran down my spine. And I'm not even a person that has a good knowledge of blues music.
Mm-hmm.
So the fact that it was so effective in stirring something in me is a testament to how successful they are in communicating that energy across the screen. For this movie to work, you have to believe that Sammy uniquely has an ability to call to mind generations of Black people when he opens his mouth. That means the film's casting team needed to cast a very young man who sounded like an older man and whose voice would touch different types of Black people when they listen to it. And they
Mm-hmm.
managed to do that in Miles Caton, who had never acted before this movie. The songs immediately stayed in my head. When the different characters from different parts of Black history and Chinese start showing up, it was a real emotional moment for me. And like you said, when you just see the characters swapping jokes with each other, dancing with each other in the juke joint, there is something genuinely beautiful in that. The
Mm-hmm.
intimacy, the homeliness that they managed to capture during that period is very successful. This is also the horniest part of this movie.
Yes, it is.
It wasn't just vampire energy that Sammy was summoning in there, it was something else because I don't know.
The reality is you have music, you have alcohol. It's not too dissimilar to today that if you have a lot of music and alcohol, there will be some friskiness in the air as well. I found the way how sex was portrayed very, I think it was handled in a very different way than what I'm used to seeing by films directed by a man. And so I think that this movie tended to prioritize female sexual pleasure more than the average male directed movie does. I think it was smart to include a lot of sex scenes in this movie.
What I had issues with structurally in Act Two was that towards the end, where you have these scenes that are spliced between multiple people, between Smoke, Annie, Stack, Sammy, and Mary, where they're kind of unpacking what exactly Smoke and Sammy were up to in Chicago, the state of their finances, who may or may not be out to get them, how sustainable the juke joint is. To me, there was something structurally about it that didn't work. I was just like, okay, so you're saying that they've bought this juke joy, but actually gangsters from Chicago are coming to look for them. Actually, they
Mm-hmm.
don't have money to run this whole place, so they're going to
Mm-hmm.
need to get more money. But then, how are they going to get more money? And you're also making a point about plantation credits, but also
Mm-hmm.
Smoke is using that as a moment to whip out his gun and point at Sammy. And I'm just like, huh? What point are you making? To me, it just felt like a plot device to get Mary to come out of the juke joint and go and meet the vampires. And that's when I can start seeing those threads, it takes me out of the movie a bit. I will say though, one other musical scene I loved in Act Two is when Remmick and his small troop comes and they're trying to get them to let them into the juke and they're singing pick poor Robin clean
Mm-hmm.
and Stack is already starting to nod his head around to the music. I found that very amusing. The final act of the movie kind of starts when Mary comes back into the juke joint. She turns Stack. Battle essentially ensues. Annie is killed. A lot of the people that were in the juke also get changed into vampires. Ultimately, Smoke and Sammy defeat Remmick and his troop. Then Smoke dies fighting the KKK. He sees the spirit of Annie and their daughter. Sammy then becomes a successful blues musician. 60 years later, he's visited by Stack and Mary, who it turns out Smoke spared. How did you feel about the final act of the movie and how it concluded?
Act 3 was the one that made me think. Act 3 was the one
Okay.
that really had me thinking about a lot of things. So obviously I was trying to work out what that vampire's ultimate motivation was. I was trying to solidify my thoughts on the role of women in this movie and in this universe actually. I think you have to watch that first post-credit scene to fully wrap up this movie, I would say. That was when I really decided that I did like this movie overall because of
Interesting.
because of older Sammy's defiance, basically. For me, this act was when I really solidified that this movie is really about assimilation and it's about the price you pay when you assimilate. And in my opinion, what Sammy does in that first post credit scene is he says, I'm not going to assimilate to your way of life and benefit from immortality in this case, literally. I'm going to enjoy the version that of my life that I love and that I enjoy. And that's linked to how he behaved in the earlier acts as well. So we see when the twins try to convince him to live a different lifestyle, basically, at one point, even at gunpoint. And he was even, he was stuck in his ways then. So it was nice to see that this part of his character had carried through all the way up to what sounds like not long before his death. What about you?
Overall, for the final act, my issues that have started happening in the second act were amplified for me, which is that I found the pacing and the structure of certain scenes to be problematic.
Mm.
I found some narrative switches and time lines to not make sense. I'm just saying that these are things that stop this from being a truly great, excellent film instead of just being a
Mm-hmm.
very good one. I still really, really, really loved a lot of sequences that happen. And you're right, a lot of the themes about blackness, identity, assimilation, artistry, colonialism really, really make their point in this final act. And I do enjoy them, but some of it gets quite muddied for me. But overall, I enjoyed the sequence up to the point of Remmick's death. Now, the
Mm-hmm.
aftermath of Smoke fighting the KKK, I found the pacing for some of that to be off. But then when Smoke sees Annie and his baby and he dies, I actually thought that was a rather good ending. Then the credits start rolling, and then you see grown up Sammy, played by Buddy Guy, who is a real blues legend, singing. And I thought that was a beautiful ending. I thought
Mm-hmm.
them showing that he lived on and he kept that mark on his face, I thought it
Mm-hmm.
was a beautiful, cool ending. And then we get to the post credit sequence, and then Mary shows up in that her salt and pepper outfit.
Mm-hmm.
And Stark shows up in his kid and play costume, and it just took me out. I don't know how to explain.
Really?
I found it silly. The idea that Smoke saves Stark is not something
Mm-hmm.
I find silly. I think it makes sense
Mm-hmm.
narratively. But there was something about the way they revealed it. I just found it ludicrous. And I also found Michael B. Jordan's acting as Stark in that scene, in that
Mm.
90 sequence, to be the worst acting I saw from him in this movie. It just didn't work for me. And to me, it knocked off 1 or 2 points from the movie for me.
So it did work for me, but there's a specific reason why it did, or at least it didn't bother me. And it was the earlier dance scene, like you mentioned. So we had already been introduced to the timeline of Black history. In the original dance scene, we're introduced to very modern twerking dancing and hip hop and this sort of thing. We're introduced to, I'm going to guess it's some sort of early rock and roll black music. And then in this scene, we're introduced to, I'm going to guess maybe it's 80s, it's
I
giving
think it's 90s. I think
90s.
it's
Okay.
90s early hip hop sound.
Yeah, exactly. So for me, it was just once again reminding us that these events are very much in the timeline of Black musical history and Black history in America. And so that was the reason why I wasn't offended by it.
But is the best way to do that by having Mary show up, smacking on a lollipop, eyeing everybody in the room in this very overwrought way? I just feel like there's a more subtle, artistic way
Mm,
that could have been done. Maybe I'm also biased because what had just happened right before, which is the title sequence being soundtracked by the real body guy singing real
mm,
blues music
mm-hmm,
very beautifully and being revealed to be an elderly Sammy. That had emotionally worked for me so well. I would have been happy to stand up at that point and leave the theater. Let's talk about the themes for this movie because there's a lot going on thematically in Sinners. I wanted to start with Black ownership of art. One thing I could tell watching it was that Ryan Coogler was making a point about what he thinks Black people's power can be in their ability to create and how important it is to own it. Part of the reason I understood this is because I had already started to see some of the discourse about the ownership rights for the movie and the deal that Ryan Coogler had struck with Warner Brothers over the film and all the pushback it had in Hollywood and all the people pushing back against the pushback. I already had that in the back of my head. So as I watched everybody in the movie, all our heroes in the movie go out of the way to protect Sammy and make sure he survives to the end of the film. And Sammy himself make sure he holds onto his guitar all the way to the end. I felt like, I see. Ryan Coogler is trying to make a point here about
mm-hmm.
how this is our power, this is our superpower. You have to hold on to it. Don't let anybody take it away from you. This is one of your strengths as Black people. I think characters like Delta Slim spell it out. He says something like, "Oh, they didn't push this on us like that religion. This comes from us." Like it's kind of apparent what point he's making, but it works quite well for me. What about you?
Yeah, I had the very similar thought throughout that ultimately this is making comments about one, assimilation, but two, ownership of black art in a racist society specifically. But what I found
Hmm.
really interesting is that I assumed that Ryan Coogler obviously wanted to make a comment about this and went into writing the movie with that in mind. But it actually turns out that started working on the movie and then negotiated the deal with Warner Brothers. So I saw that he spoke about that ultimately he was making a piece of art about black ownership, and I guess he decided that I have to, put my money where my mouth is, and I have to embody it myself.
He was inspired by his own work.
What I will say though, this is why I started to feel depressed in Act One and also towards the end, because I think things like this can just hit too close to home sometimes, and if you look at the way how the movie ends, yes, there's an attempt to own black art and black spaces, but look at what happens to them. It's burnt to the ground, and it's burnt to the ground in it's burnt to the ground by a group of people who are basically preaching assimilation, that we're all going to be together as one. In other words, you don't need a black space anymore because we're all going to hold hands and be, one love sort of thing. And it's just not realistic.
On the point of assimilation, I do think Ryan Coogler draws a contrast between our two protagonists in Smoke and
Yeah,
Stack in how they approach invitations to assimilation to kind of
100%.
try and demonstrate different schools of thoughts for Black people.
Hmm.
Stack, from early on, they're showing hints that he is perhaps more susceptible to being wooed by ideas of being invited into this in group of hedonistic people, whereas Smoke seems to be just inherently more suspicious and cynical and resistant to that stuff. Plus, he has Annie on his side who is essentially putting some kind of protections on him and giving him information that makes him suspicious of that stuff. And ultimately, by the end of the film, Stack does assimilate into them
Yeah.
with his white passing girlfriend,
Hmm.
and Smoke chooses to die. Basically, he
Hmm.
takes off the mojo around his neck, so there's an intentionality there, which had
Hmm.
been protecting his life this whole time. And he kind of chooses to go and be with the ancestors, go and be with his partner and his lost daughter. I drew some parallels with other work that Coogler has done before. At the end of Black Panther, the first one, Killmonger, who's also played by Michael B. Jordan, said, "Bury me in the ocean with my ancestors who jumped from ships because they knew death was better than bondage." I feel like Ryan Coogler, that's his opinion on how Black people should approach this kind of stuff, basically, is that rather die, literally, and die on your own terms than assimilate. Mm-hmm. Whether that is physical death or metaphorical death, I found that interesting that he was showing those two walks of life. Considering Ryan Coogler himself is married to a Black woman, I imagine that he is seeing himself in the Smoke character more than he's seeing himself in the Stack character.
Yeah, I did get that vibe, yeah. So I think furthermore to this point is Stack's character and his relationship to Mary versus Smoke's character and his relationship to Annie was something that bothered me throughout the movie. There were just so many signs that I couldn't ignore. So for example, and I'm sorry, I have to tell the truth, it's very explicit, right? When we see Annie being introduced, we see her being introduced that first we understand she's lost a baby. Then her long lost partner or ex-partner comes on the scene and she's basically greeted with backshots. Whereas no, she is. She gets greeted with backshots, right?
Greeted with backshots is crazy. D Smoke first drops flowers at their child's grave. But he doesn't literally just appear. He doesn't just appear in front of her and say, "Turn around, girl."
Basically. And then after that is, "Can you cook some catfish for me for free?" I didn't hear anything about any payment.
No, right? they had a whole conversation about money, D, where she was telling him that she doesn't want his blood money, and he was telling her that the plantation money ain't no good and that all money is blood money. It was giving very much Rock Nation brunch.
Yeah, but that was before he asked her to basically spend the whole afternoon frying catfish for him. But yeah, I couldn't help but notice Mary. He greets her long lost partner Stack in they have had a disagreement basically. But we see that he cares for her a lot. He even says he would kill himself for her at one point. Whereas with Woman's character, it's basically giving sacrificial dark-skinned Black woman yet again. How many times do we have to see this storyline?
I just want to say again, I love Wumi Mosako.
And let's get into that.
That's all I have to say about that.
Let's get into that very quickly, right? Because this is something that really pissed me off when I was hearing the dialogue about this movie before watching it. For the people that are saying that Wunmi looks like his mom and looks like a mammy and she's ugly, basically. Ugly where? That woman can never be ugly.
I think that is an indictment of how infrequent it is for people to see people that look like Black women that you see every day on the big screen. Yes, there are lots of Black celebrities and Black actors in Hollywood, but the majority of the female actors in Hollywood are disproportionately light-skinned or biracial. So there's this weird dissonance that ends up happening where even though people fully know that in their real life, they interact with women like this all the time. But suddenly when they see women like that on the big screen beside someone they consider to be a big Hollywood heartthrob, suddenly it doesn't make sense to them anymore.
I was appalled by that. I was truly appalled because Wunmi doesn't even look like an everyday Black woman. She's actually very gorgeous in my opinion. It's crazy. It's absolutely diabolical.
She has unusually elfin features. It's so ridiculous. Let's talk about passing and how this movie is addressing the concept of passing. One drop rule was very, very strong then. It still is now in America, but particularly during this period of time, it was particularly powerful. Like, if you were trying to pass as white and it was discovered that you weren't, you could literally be killed. And that is a reality that drives some of this film's plotting. That's part of the point with the Mary character. For me, the reason I found that almost distracting, but you didn't feel this way, is that to me, Haley Steinfeld doesn't look like a person who for a second I would suspect is anything other than white. So the idea that there is a consistent threat that she's going to be found out is one that I struggle to wrap my head around as I'm watching the movie. I do think there's a possibility that this is because I was socialized in a world when 99% of people around me were unambiguously Black. So the nuances of what it is to be in a multiracial society where there are people that are very racially ambiguous and identify as Black some of it might be lost on me.
Yeah, I didn't feel that way. She does look like she could have something else in her. Now, of course, race is about phenotype, so what you present as is very much dependent on where you are. But for me, she looks like somebody who could have at least a black grandparent or something. So it does make sense for me that she was
That is
cast in this
crazy to
role.
me.
For
That is
sure,
so crazy
absolutely.
to me. That's
Absolutely. I've
such a.
seen plenty.
I would even see her Filipino side before I ever saw the black side.
Wow.
But you're right. She is partly black, so you are correct. But it's just wild how race works, because I'm looking at her and I'm like, I can't see.
You can't observe
a
it.
hint of what you people are talking about.
So speaking about observation, one thing I found really interesting, and I want to hear your opinion about it, is the vampire. We're made to believe that he doesn't see race effectively, and I've seen Ryan Coogler say explicitly that he wanted to.
Sorry?
Yeah, well, exactly. Let's get into that. So basically,
Sorry?
my question, my contention is basically, what are we supposed to believe about Remmick's views on race? Because we see that he's willing to adopt racism when it's to his benefit. So he knows that he's talking to the Ku Klux Klan when he gets into the couple's house, and he's willing to throw out racism and try and use it to entice this black community to join his cult. So it almost does imply that, yeah, he doesn't see race. He doesn't care either way. Or maybe he thinks it's stupid. I'm not sure. I don't know. What do you think?
Sorry, I'm still caught up on you saying that Ryan Coogler saying that Remmick doesn't see race. Excuse me?
Probably he didn't say bar for bar that he doesn't see race, but basically the point is he's not supposed to be viewed as a classic white American racist from this era. Do you think he actually believes in it? Right?
I see.
That's
like, is he a racist?
Exactly. Is he someone who actually adopts this?
That question, to me, you can put literally any white people in that situation, including white people that have done great things for black people. And I'll still think the answer is yes, of course he's a racist.
Even a 1,500-year-old Irish immigrant vampire?
100%. 100%. Right now, as we speak, the same Ireland that is doing a lot right now to stand up for Palestinian rights are also simultaneously doing all sorts of protests about how black people and immigrants are destroying their country at the same time right now.
Yeah.
People can exist in multitudes, and white people, I assure you, they're able to understand structural issues and still be anti-black at the same time.
So this gets into one of the reasons why, again, I didn't love this movie the first time I watched it, but the second time I watched it, and just thinking about the conversation it was making me have, made me like it more. So for me, as someone who's of Caribbean origin, right, I really struggle with the specific conversation around Irish and Scottish people and their oppression, which is real, right? But I don't like the way how there's a tendency to almost equate that to black oppression, which I just don't think is on the same page at all. And what I found interesting is I wasn't sure about Ryan Coogler's position on this. So even when I was watching his interviews, it did seem that he wanted to draw these connections, but I do think you have to do that in a delicate way, because there are Irish and Scottish people who really feel like we shouldn't be allowed, especially as Caribbean people, right? A lot of us have Irish and Scottish DNA. So they almost feel like we shouldn't be able to talk about the fact that, yes, you guys were also oppressing our ancestors. We understand that you were operating within a English occupation, but there's still layers to it. And I'm not sure that this movie does a good job of actually unpacking that properly, but I'm willing to accept it because I guess that's for the audience to do, right? It's for the audience to make their own decisions. But I have seen some black people really standing on this, yeah, we're all in this together, we're all oppressed together. And for me, I'm just not there yet.
You know what this just reminded me of? A couple of years ago, I was in Barbados and we went to this beautiful nature park owned by this man. He was a white man. After we did our tour, I don't drink, but he poured our group some rum. He chatted with us. He was very friendly. I asked him, when did he first move to Barbados? When did his family move here? This man starts proudly revealing to me about how his Lily White's family has been in Barbados for generations, and how the reason he owns this plantation, and yes, he used that word, is just because of the work they did after they were initially brought in as servants. And I didn't get into it with him, but all I could think of was, isn't that interesting that your people were brought over here from what you're saying as servants, and now here you are now, you own this gigantic piece of land plantation, but the equivalent black people in Barbados cannot say the same?
Yeah. My family doesn't have a plantation.
So, how do you think the two things are the same? It was just very funny. So I just think that's an illustration of how people think something that is not exactly the same is
Yeah.
the same.
And what I find interesting as well is I was really intrigued to see the response from people who are Irish or Irish descendants and what they think about this movie. And I was surprised to see that they were engaging with it in a positive way. I saw some people saying that they enjoyed seeing, folk songs on the big screen.
The thing is, for me though, I love everything that's done with Remmick so much. I
Okay.
love the Jack O'Connell casting. I love the music that Ludwig Göransson made for the movie that was Irish. I
Mm-hmm.
love the design of Remmick's character, both in his human form and in his most demonic form. I love the way how he descends into looking more and more monstrous as the
Yeah.
movie goes on. I love the various ways he manipulates people's culture to try and get at them.
Mm-hmm.
I found it actually quite a
Mm-hmm.
clever way of viewing how certain kinds of culturally aware white people can be dangerous. That
Mm-hmm.
scene where he's talking to Grace in Chinese about how he knows how she likes to be licked, we were shook in the theater when that moment happened. The way he also uses religion against Sammy in particular, that scene was extremely effective for me. You and I are both people who are cynical about religious institutions at best. I watched that movie in a theater in Lagos, Nigeria during Easter weekend, surrounded by very, very religious people. When
Mm-hmm.
Sammy is trying to escape, but it appears all is lost, Remmick is about to attack him, and he starts saying the Lord's Prayer. The entire theater was clearly so overwhelmed. They thought this was this beautiful Hail Mary, God is going to save you now moment. They started saying the prayer along with him. And
Wow.
then they get a rude awakening when Remmick starts saying it and the other vampires start saying it, and they all just went silent. You could have heard a pin
Mm-hmm.
drop inside that theater. And
Mm-hmm.
I thought that moment was very effective in illustrating certain things that I have felt for a long time
Mm.
about Black people's relationship with certain kinds of religion. This is one of my favorite villains of contemporary horror, to be honest.
When I first watched it, I thought, why isn't this villain just a white American clan member? But I do kind of feel like it's more intelligent and more nuanced to use the Irish vampire for the reasons we've already discussed.
There is a moment where he says that the men who stole his father's land forced the words of our father onto him, but it still brings him comfort. That is low key a beautiful line for a villain to deliver. And
Mm,
it only really works where the person is a member of both a colonized and
yeah.
colonizer class. Him being Irish, and it didn't have to be only Irish, but in this case, being Irish, it hits that so much harder because I presume what he's referring to is English colonizers, right?
Yeah. Actually, it
And
could be
him,
Roman.
oh yeah, it could be
Yeah,
Roman.
could be Romans.
Yeah, some kind of imperialistic colonizers came to his
Mm-hmm.
father's land in ancient Ireland and they forced all of them to become, I presume, Catholic. And one thing about religion, you can't try and out religion Irish Catholics.
Mm-hmm.
It's deep in their culture.
Mm-hmm.
So him kind of expressing the fact that it's tied to his identity, even whilst acknowledging that it's tied to his own people's colonization, I thought was
Mm-hmm.
actually really intelligent.
Mm-hmm.
As a person whose relationship with religion is highly cynical, I think the way Remmick uses the history of people's religious colonization is very effective. Ryan Coogler also establishes a counter to that through Annie's hoodoo. And I think that's interesting. One of my favorite sound moments in the film is when she's striking a match in her house and it matches the beat of the music in the background.
So automatically, I saw vibes of missionaries immediately when it came to the cult. We literally have, I believe they are Mormons walking around in the Caribbean trying to recruit people. And it really is giving that vibe of, knocking on the door, trying to get in, and they're trying to spread their word, right? Their gospel. And in my personal opinion, they're not doing it from a place of wanting to actually improve the lives of the people they're trying to convert. It's because of their own selfish reasons, which is very much what I believe Remmick is trying to do. He's trying to build community. He doesn't actually care about what the other people are losing by joining his community. He's just trying to do it by any means necessary. Going back to the theme of stack versus smoke and how willing they are to assimilate, and in particular how that relates to their romantic relationships. The depiction of Wunmi's character, Annie, and how she is ultimately the closest person to her ancestral roots, right? And we see that explored through her adoption of, I'm going to say it's Yoruba. Is it Yoruba traditional religion? Yeah, because we see her even speaking Yoruba at one point.
Yeah, she speaks some Yoruba.
Yeah. I found it interesting. I don't think Ryan Coogler is being in any way subtle about his opinion that black men should, quote unquote, stay close to their roots, including dating the unambiguous dark skinned black woman. And that woman is going to ultimately be a sacrificial lamb for him and use her intelligence and the various things that she has going for her. In the case of Annie, that is her religious and spiritual powers to save him. And again, I really didn't care for how this movie really depicted dark skinned black women as the savior for a black man. And she could save everybody except for herself and for her late child. That really bugged me.
However, though, does Smoke not still ultimately decide to also not save himself? Like he could have kept the merger on and stayed alive, but he
Mhm.
kind of chose to die to be with her.
But that was very much his choice,
His
right?
choice.
Whereas I'm showing that
Mm.
if Annie had the choice to save her baby, I'm pretty sure she would have, right? And when she decides to actually, she tells him, if they come for me, just let me go. That was still sacrificial in a way because she was trying to go back to her child. Notice that she wasn't telling him to go and join their child, right? So this is what I mean.
She does say to him that there's someone over there waiting for me and they're waiting for you too.
Yeah, but it wasn't a go back to our baby. Basically, it was a I know you're going to be messing around in these streets, but just remember that me and your baby are waiting for you. It's still very self-sacrificial, in my opinion.
On the point of Yoruba mythology, the fact that our protagonists are identical twins, I think
Mm,
has an interesting connection to Yoruba mythology. Yoruba people have a lot of interesting law that has to do with twins. There are certain parts of Yoruba land that have some of the highest incidents of fraternal twinning in the world. In a lot of traditional Yoruba religion and mythology, you quite literally worship twins. In traditional Yoruba naming convention, you name twins Taiwo and Kehinde, and in fact, every child born after those twins also have special names because they are
mm,
so precious. They're considered deities. They're considered to have an ability to connect with each other and other beings in ways that the rest of us don't understand. So I think the fact that even after conversion into vampirism, Smoke and Stack still have this connection. They're making a point there with Yoruba mythology. The
mm-hmm,
fact that Stack seems to have some degree of autonomy
mm-hmm.
that the other vampires don't because of his bond to Smoke.
Yeah.
I think that's an intentional thing. Where it loses me is why Mary also seems to have that autonomy. That doesn't make sense to me. Is that
Mm.
because her and Stark's love is so strong? Well, I don't buy it.
I don't buy that. He does say verbatim that he would kill himself for her or he would put his life on the line. Also, he's apparently trying to encourage her to go and live a better life without him, right? He's trying to tell her, lean into your whiteness, go be with the white man and live a happy white life. Leave me over here with the other blacks, basically.
If I start to speak on Michael B. Jordan and his relationship
Mm-hmm.
with non black
Mm-hmm.
women, I'll say things I don't want to say. So let's just leave that there. But some of the history of the brothers' relationship with each other when it comes to their partners and their father. I actually
Mm-hmm.
really like the suggestions that are sprinkled in throughout that Smoke is uniquely violent,
Mm.
and in some ways he's getting his just rewards for that violence and damage to his community. They tell us that Smoke killed their father because he was abusing Stack. And Stack and Smoke ask Sammy, they check with Sammy that he isn't being abused by his father. There's even a moment when Stack, after he has been turned, when he's knocking on the door to ask to be let out, he says something like, listen, Smoke, let me out. You know I don't like this. And
Mm.
for a moment, I was like, was there something in their childhood that their dad would lock him up in confined
Mm.
spaces and stuff like that? So those little hints, I was actually very intrigued by them. I'd have actually liked to see more. There was also a moment where Stark tells Smoke that are you going to let this witch get in between us again
Mm-hmm.
regarding Annie? And I'm like, oh, what happened there? Was this when Smoke and Annie lost their baby? Did something happen in Smoke and Stack's relationship because of the grief he was facing there? And
Mm-hmm.
is Stack perhaps resentful or jealous of that dynamic? The fact that Stack and Mary want Smoke and Annie to be converted so they can all be together in the undead existence suggests to me that Stack understands that if Annie is removed from the equation, Smoke will not fully
Yeah.
go on a journey with him.
Mm-hmm.
That is interesting to me. The whole idea of where the autonomy starts and stops for the vampires is something I'd have actually liked them explored a bit more.
That's interesting. Yeah, it's true now that I think about it. I guess the way how I interpreted it is that the vampires are basically one big body, right? Again, it's this idea that they are one. I guess the analogy is going to be post racial society, right? That nothing really matters in this community apart from their immortality or joint immortality.
Let's talk about the Chows. The Chows represent real life descendants of Chinese immigrants that lived in the deep south,
Mm-hmm.
who would typically be very economically involved with the Black community. They would have supermarkets, including in Mississippi, where the movie is set. There's been a lot of conversation about how Grace ultimately is the person who lets the
Yeah.
vampires in to this place that's supposed to be a haven for these Black people. And if you include her and Bill, these POC, which
Mm-hmm.
ultimately leads to the demise of most of the characters. What point do you think the movie is trying to make with that?
So I think I would go even one step back and highlight the fact that it's actually Mary who, in my opinion, is the first person who really gives the vampires the kind of entry point into the juke joint, right? She
Clock it. Clock it.
she goes over there and she gives them too much information basically in a way that somebody who was racialized as fully black, I don't believe they would, because they would be naturally distrusting of people who present as white. And bear in mind, two of these people are literally Ku Klux Klan. But because she presents as white, she doesn't see fear in them in the same way that the black people, especially someone like an Annie would, right? So I do think the movie was making a very deliberate point with Mary being the entry point and then Grace being the one who fully says, you know what, forget all of you guys. I need to get home to my husband and my kid. Let the vampires come in. This is how I started to really solidify my opinion that this movie is making a commentary about black people assimilating into this quote unquote society that's trying to get towards a post racial society, right? And I don't think he has anything nice to say about that.
I was trying to figure out what this film stands on, the concept of solidarity between different types of people of color was.
Mm,
And this is part of my wider criticism of the movie, that there are moments where it feels like it's throwing different things out there to cause a conversation without actually wanting to say a singular profound thing.
mm,
On the one hand, with that grace moment, you quite objectively have our one non-black character inside the juke joint who was welcomed in by this black community
mm-hmm,
being the one person, despite everybody begging her not to, be the one to invite the white devil
mm-hmm,
in to cause harm to those black people and herself, which, in my opinion, is very clearly suggesting a certain stance on the concept of POC solidarity. But on
mm-hmm,
the flip hand, during Sammy's performance that initially invites all these spirits, you
mm-hmm,
clearly see a Chinese traditional performer amongst the people that are dancing around in the juke joint. And
mm-hmm,
they show real shots of Grace and Bo genuinely melting into the flow and the rhythm of everybody else around them. There are
yeah,
also moments when characters are reminiscing at the end of what that wonderful day was before everything went left, where there's very earnestly included shots of the
mm-hmm,
Chows helping set up shop,
mm-hmm,
which to me is suggesting that this movie believes at the same time that, yeah, no, we're all in this together under white supremacy.
mm-hmm.
So I genuinely don't know. And that is my criticism of the movie. I'm not sure it knows either what it's trying to say. I think it just wants us to have this conversation.
So here's the thing though, it's important to remember that the Chows are not there to fellowship with the black people. They're not there to just come and enjoy music. They're there because it's a business. They're there to sell their products, right? And the movie actually alludes to it quite explicitly that they're making a fair amount of money off of this event, right? So that begs the question, if they were not going to make money from this event, would they have attended?
But
And
every
this is
but that's But that's the case for other black people too. Delta Slim has to be convinced
Hmm.
and wooed with lots of money and lots of beer before he even slightly
Hmm.
considers it. Cornbread also doesn't want to come until Stack convinces his wife that it's in
Hmm.
his financial interest to do it. So I don't
But
really
is
think
it?
that is a separating factor between our characters.
I think it is because of the racial point, though. It wouldn't be out of place for Cornbread or Delta Slim to go there after it's successful. So Delta Slim's actual contention is that, listen, you're offering me $20 today, but he didn't think it was going to be recurring money, right? But even
Mm-hmm.
outside of performance, this would be the type of event that he would go to. My question is, would it be the type of event that the Chows would go to? And if the answer to that is no, then I don't think we can draw the conclusion that, well, because they were there hoping to set up shop, that's an indication that it's a sign of POC solidarity. It could literally be very much similar to the way how there are Asian superstores in black countries and black cities today. It could very easily be a very similar dynamic.
I think that is a good point. I have a question for you in response
Mm.
to that. If there were white people in that group, do you think that their performers would have shown up dancing with the black performers as well?
But I think it's a good
Yes or no?
question. I think it's a good question, but remember that we've had the conversation about the vampire here, who's drawing parallels to his oppression versus the oppression of the black people at this event, right? My response is it depends on the type of white person. If these are white people who are Irish immigrants or even Italian immigrants, then this could very easily be a conversation, right? But if they are white, southern, white Americans, maybe not.
But then that's still to my point that the movie is trying to still say something about a solidarity between different kinds of people that are affected by white supremacy.
Hmm.
The same way you just drew that line of Irish and Italian immigrants versus other type of white people that perhaps descended from, you know, English or French people. That is the same way the movie, by having the child in there dancing and twirling and their traditional performers also be amongst the black
Mm.
ancestors and descendants. That's not, and they didn't have to do that, but yet they chose to.
Hmm.
It's kind
I'm
of the
sim-
thing.
I understand what you're saying. I'm just simply saying that the child's existence at that event alone is not a signifier of POC solidarity,
Yes,
and I don't think
but
we can draw that conclusion.
I agree that that's not inherently a sign of POC solidarity, but I
Mm.
think the movie's choice to include their visuals in the visuals where they are trying to draw something about cultural synergy and speaking to the diaspora is a sign that they are trying to connect them. If
Mm.
I hadn't seen those dancers in that scene, this none of this would have crossed my mind. It's when I saw
Mm.
that I was like, oh,
So I do think it was a bit undisciplined to include them in there. I really did enjoy that scene, by the way. I really enjoyed it because it was making the point that black music exists on a huge timeline, really, going all the way back to our ancestors in West Africa and various other parts of Africa as well. So by including the Chow's ancestors in there as well, it was just like, well, that was a bit of a tangent. Why did you include that in there? I
it
guess you're
almost
arguing
muddies
that
the
it was,
points,
yeah. So
which is my
you're arguing,
criticism of this movie in general. A lot of points are being
yeah,
muddied by too many concepts being thrown around at the same time.
having the Chinese kind of ancestral link in there didn't make so much sense because there was no Chinese music being explored here.
Now, they have told us that people like Sami, people like griots and so on, that can call
Mm,
upon spirits. They never said black only spirits or African
mm,
American spirits or anything. So it's and in fact, it works on Remmick. It is already established that it can cross different kinds of lines, including racial and cultural lines. It's not the concept that Sami singing could bring out these people that I find to be editorially suspect. Is the fact that the
mm,
movie makes sure to highlight it. I do agree with you that ultimately the movie is criticizing or at least putting a critical lens on the role certain kinds of Asian
mm.
immigrants play in the economic well-being of black cities and towns. But then when you hear Ryan Coogler speak about that, it doesn't sound that critical.
This goes back to my original issue with him. I'm okay with the movie leaving it up to interpretation personally because it is a very nuanced topic. I would have liked it if he made the points here with a little bit more care, let's say. But I wasn't massively offended by it while watching the movie.
I wasn't offended at all. I was amused, if anything, because it was just a repetition of things I've seen from Coogler before.
Hmm.
I've always considered the reception to Black Panther to be so fascinating because to me, that is a movie made by an African American director with a primarily African set of characters one prominent African American character who, in my opinion, that movie punishes for his ideology. And in my opinion, that movie's ethos is that the diaspora all have to link hands,
Mm-hmm.
basically. So to me, this is just Ryan Coogler's political stance on this subject,
Mm.
and it finds its way into all of his work. So I can't say I'm surprised. I just want to make one or two more comments on technical parts of this movie, of which I think everything is excellently done. The cinematographer for this movie is an indigenous woman called Autumn Dorod Akpal. She shot the film on 65mm film using a combination of IMAX and Ultra Panavision cameras. And so the scenes alternate between aspect ratios. Ryan Coogler went
Mm-hmm.
out of his way to promote this before the film came out to encourage people to go and see it in IMAX. And it was genuinely worth it. And it was really a pleasure to the cinephile in me to see how much people were discussing how enjoyable it was to experience that. I think the movie looks beautiful throughout in terms of cinematography. I think that the way they stylize how their supernatural creatures look, from the glint in the vampire's eyes to the double fangs, including stacked grilled fangs, to the stylized way blood comes out of all of our characters, I
Mm.
enjoyed it all. As you have said, the music is just excellent in this movie. This movie is basically a musical, actually. It reminds me
Yeah,
of
basically.
the Coen brothers' Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? The music is driving the story continuously. And if you were to take the music out of this movie, you lose so much of its magic.
Mm-hmm.
I just think, general as a technical accomplishment, this movie is really an excellent addition to Black canon.
I was impressed with all of the costumes. I think
I
I
love the
really did feel,
costumes.
yeah, like especially the twins. I have to admit that their outfits were really good. I did feel fully immersed in the era, right? And I think that was what contributed to my depression in the beginning because I just thought, oh gosh, I already know what's coming. But yeah, I think he did a really good job of world building, and yeah, felt like I was right there. I wanted to talk a little bit about the twins and what they mean for the community because these twins have come back and purchased property to host this juke joint, hosted the juke joint, been attacked, and basically wiped out the entire village in one day. Now, bear in mind, these twins, they've obviously been in Chicago doing criminal activities. There's references to Stack being a pimp multiple times. There's references to them stealing from both the Irish and another group, I think it's Italians. And I interpreted it as they were basically coming back to this community to money launder. And it made me think about the way how we treat wealthy black people, especially black people who maybe are not doing things that are great for the community. And I wondered what Ryan Coogler has to say about the twins and maybe people like them. As far as I'm concerned, the twins, they didn't have good intentions for the community, right? So they know that Delta Slim, for example, is an alcoholic and they're more than happy to supply him with alcohol as long as he comes and performs at their juke joint. They know that Sammy is incredibly talented, but they want to control his behavior, and Smoke even puts a gun in his face when he threatens to do what he wants to do.
These are very apt observations. I want to quote something a character says in the movie, which I didn't recall the first time I watched it, but the second time I watched it, I was like, okay, this movie is actually critiquing our protagonist more than I thought. There's
Mm-hmm.
a point after they all do the garlic test to determine if anybody within the juke is actually secretly a vampire. And Perlene doesn't want to taste the garlic, and Smoke is about to shoot her if she doesn't do it.
Mm-hmm.
She says to him, "You are evil man, no wonder the devil's coming for us." I'm
Mm.
paraphrasing, but that's basically what she says. I do think there's a point the movie is making there that Smoke and Stack, but especially Smoke, has some real darkness inside of him that can be harmful to his community.
Mm-hmm.
And in some ways, he's getting his just rewards. He's been protected this whole time by the mojo that Annie put around his neck, but that
Mm-hmm.
hasn't stopped that violence and karma spilling over to everybody around him. And yeah, it just continuously happens until finally he takes off the mojo and he dies. So I think there is something the movie is saying in actually acknowledging that somewhat poisonous or toxic position that the brothers are playing within their community. There's also a moment where Cornbread, when he's trying to convince them to let him into the Duke after he's become a vampire, and they are clearly refusing, especially because Annie has told him that this man is dead.
Mm-hmm.
And he says, "It be your own people, you just like the white man." And it's
Mm-hmm.
played for laughs, but I also think they are once again trying to draw some parallels to the conversations we've been watching Smoke, especially, but also start having about the role they play in, yes, providing services for their community, and yes, even providing jobs to their community, but
Mm.
ultimately, in some ways, leeching off of their labor,
Yeah.
leeching off of their goodwill. It's very Rock Nation brunch
Yeah,
stuff.
exactly. New blacks.
There's something about black capitalism being said there. However, I'm not sure that it's actually being critical. Just because you and I are viewing it as a critical thing doesn't mean I necessarily think the original point of view of this film is to actually necessarily paint them with that harsher
Yeah.
brush. Because if you hear Ryan Coogler speak, and if you hear the stories of how Black Panther and Creed were made, he and Michael B. Jordan give very much hashtag black excellence, hashtag buy back your block, very much Black Wall Street will save us kind of stuff. So I'm not sure they're actually that introspective in that way.
Yeah.
With good art, other people can see stuff that the artist is revealing about themselves, even if they don't realize it. But that doesn't
Mm-hmm.
mean that was originally the artist's intention.
Yeah, I definitely didn't have a clear opinion on what Ryan Coogler thinks, but it was something that I reflected on.
I wanted to very briefly talk about the performances because I did enjoy a number of the performances in this movie very much. I thought that James Lawson, who plays Pauline, is gorgeous, first of all. She also was a great singer in the scenes where she had to sing and perform and dance. And she really got the sensuality that this movie
Mm-hmm.
needed that kind of character to do really well. So I really enjoyed her performance. I enjoyed Lindo's performance very much. One of my favorite quotes from him is the part where he said, "The devil done came for me many times, but who have to go through his old friend, Dr. Slim."
Mm-hmm.
I have watched movies and listened to music of old school Southern Black folk talking about meeting the devil in the at the crossroads in the South. I enjoyed that kind of language very much. Many people have said Miles Caton is brilliant, and it really has to be said again. This movie doesn't work if he doesn't work, so he really did
Mm-hmm.
an extraordinary job. Michael B. Jordan. I used to be a Michael B. Jordan doubter. Would I say I'm not a doubter anymore? I still have some doubt, but he did keep me entertained for 2 hours straight, and
He
I will
did.
give him that. And
Mm-hmm.
I don't think he carried the movie as a look, guys, I am a movie star. This is the movie where I am the lead. And I went on that journey with him. So I will give him that. This is the best Michael B. Jordan big budget performance I've ever seen. My favorite Michael B. Jordan movie I've ever seen is still Chronicle, a movie he made when he was very young. But considering I wasn't that gagged by him in Black Panther or Creed or Fantastic Four, he kind of convinced me he has some charisma, he has some charm, he has some chemistry in this movie.
Yeah, I would agree with that. So when I saw that he was the lead, I thought, oh, here we go. I'm not a massive fan of his, and like you, I wasn't impressed by his performance in Black Panther necessarily. I thought it was very surface level, and yeah, I was pleasantly surprised. But having said that, I really struggled with the whole Joe character thing. But I do think I was being very harsh because again, I was watching Severance at the time. But yeah, I agree. I think that the performances across the board were very strong. I can't actually think of anyone who really let the team down. I will admit though, I do think Wunmi Masaka's performance was maybe a little bit one dimensional. But
I
to
was
be
about
fair,
to say,
her character was one dimensional, and that's my problem. And that's one of my biggest critiques actually, that this movie doesn't really care for women's character. But yeah, that was my only real critique when it comes to performances.
did you like Haley Steinfeld's performance as Mary?
I did. I did. I thought she did a good job. And again, I was introduced to this movie because of a lot of backlash regarding her casting and also what this movie has to say about light skinned versus dark skinned black women. But I think she did a really good job. She was kind of a loose wire. And I love seeing a loose wire woman on big screen, right? She was passionate, she was vulnerable, she was silly at times. Again, in my opinion, she was the one that let the devil in, she let the vampires in. I think she did a great job. What do you think?
I thought she was okay. I wasn't gagging
Mm.
over it. There were some moments I thought she understood what that character needs to be, and
Yeah.
she did it very well. There were some moments I thought she slightly overplayed her hand for me.
Mm.
Yeah. I enjoyed both Lee Jun Lee as Grace Chow and Yao as Bo Chow very
Mm-hmm.
much. As annoying as some of Grace's behavior was, I felt like the actress was committed. You know
Yeah,
what I
she
mean?
was.
When it feels like a person has just thrown themselves into this world, that she's going to engulf herself in this character and her motivations and her frustrations and her bad and good choices. I enjoyed that a lot. The final shot when she stakes Bo and the fire is all around them, I thought was a fantastic shot. And then as for Yao as Bo Chow, he was just hot. I found him very attractive.
It was hot, actually.
That's really what I have to say about that character. I also enjoyed his performance, but also he was hot. The Mariana Trench is 6,000 fathoms deep and it is the lowest depth man has reached inside the earth. We are going to be talking about how deep certain films are. D, how deep is Sinners on a scale of up to 6,000 fathoms?
I would give it 4,500.
Hmm.
It has things to say, but they didn't land everything very well. I think certain ideas could have been explored more. But at the same time, I am happy with the director leaving things up to interpretation as well. But certain things like comparisons between Irish oppression and Black oppression, I do think that should have been handled with a bit more care. What do you think?
I'll go further. I'll say it's 5,500 fathoms
Oh.
deep. It is one of the deepest movies I've ever watched. It's using a motif of familiar fantasy fare to
Mm.
try and unpack things about what holds us together as Black people, as the diaspora, as
Mm-hmm.
in the case of our characters, descendants of slaves. I think it really is trying to dig quite deep. So, does it accomplish all of it correctly? No. This is a movie that you can watch on three separate layers. You could watch this movie as just straightforward vampire fun because you can watch it as a movie trying to say something about ownership. You can watch it about a movie trying to say the deep, deep conflicts that exist between people trying to assimilate and people refusing to assimilate. We are also now going to look at what other people thought about Sinners across the internet in our Is It Really That Deep segment, where we look at opinions we found from across Letterboxd, YouTube, Reddit, wherever, to see people that have strong opinions and check, is it really that deep?
There's the first says that one sequence, you'll know it when you see it. Magnum opus type scene, spiritual awakening type scene, inspirational, foundational, monumental. Is it really that deep?
It is. There are many people I have met, different types of people who were extremely moved by that scene. I think it is a true accomplishment from Ryan Coogler.
Yeah, I completely agreed. I loved it. I wasn't so sure about the Chinese ancestors being included, but I did love the depiction of Black history through time in one singular scene. It was really amazing. It was definitely that deep. Okay, here's another one. You see Haley Stanfield in this, and everything Shamik Moore did starts to make more sense. Is it really that deep?
No, it is not. This comment is a very nonsense comment. Shamik Moore plays Miles Morales Spider Man in the Amazing Spider Man movies, and Haley Steinfeld plays his love interest, Gwen Stacy. There was a whole thing where, as they were promoting the last movie, he was clearly down bad for her. For
Mm.
context, Shamik Moore is black. He was clearly down bad for her and he was doing the most over her matter, crashing out on social media. Meanwhile, this woman was engaged to a whole white man.
Oh.
There's a whole thing that certain kinds of like black nerdy guys are obsessed with Haley Steinfeld. And to that, all I can say is stand up. Did they not see how she literally spat into Stack's mouth and then he ended up undead? Stand up.
Mm. Here's another one. It says, I don't get the hype. This movie was so cheesy and tried to cram 13 concepts into one movie with nothing interesting or clever. I hated it. Is it really that deep?
It's not that deep. The movie does try to cram too many concepts in, but you can't say that they aren't interesting. If you genuinely found nothing interesting to talk about from this movie, I don't know what actually be interesting you in films.
Yeah, I agree with that. I do agree with the critique about the concepts as well, though, and I felt it at times as well. But like you said, to say there's nothing interesting, that definitely sounds hyperbolic to me. Yeah, probably this person was just a bit irritated.
We are doing our Bechdel test segment. The Bechdel test is a very simple measure of the representation of women in film and other fiction. It's based on a comic strip by Alison Bechdel where one woman explains that she only goes to a movie if it satisfies the following three requirements. One, the movie needs to have at least two women in it. Two, they must talk to each other. And three, they must talk to each other about something other than a man. The
Mhm.
tests and the fact that so few pieces of fiction actually pass the test is used to demonstrate just how poor the representation of women is in a lot of mainstream fiction.
We'll work out here whether it passed the Bechdel test. So the movie obviously has more than two women in it. And those women do speak to each other very briefly, though. Do they speak to each other about anything other than a man? I don't think so. My gut would be to say this movie doesn't pass the Bechdel test, right? It doesn't actually care about women very much, in my view.
Wow. I've gone to go and check on bechdel.test.com. The
Mm-hmm.
movie does in fact pass the test. During
Mm.
the clove eating test, Annie and Perline argue over whether it matters if a clove taste is important.
Goodness me.
There it
Goodness
is.
me. Well, look, okay, fair enough. The bar's in hell. And yeah, so I did enjoy this movie. I gave it an 8 out of 10. But I did take serious issue with how this movie conducts itself when it comes to women. The vast majority of the women in this movie are literally there to serve a man or to even serve the storyline for a male character. So whether that is Annie literally being the sacrificial lamb for Smoke, whether that is Mary inviting passion in Stack, whether that is Grace trying to find her husband and literally sacrificing everyone else to go and find her husband. Then you also have Perline. But Perline, unfortunately, she falls into the Jezebel trope for me. I'm not saying that in a disrespectful way, right? But at the end of the day, her character is extremely sexualized. We don't know much about her apart from her sexualization. We know she's married, so we already know that she's not necessarily against lying and stuff like that. I can't really think of a well developed woman character in this movie, and it really bugged me. I'm really losing my patience with movies treating women in this way.
I want to touch on Perlene being married. This
Mm-hmm.
movie has a very interesting relationship with marriage.
Mm-hmm.
It points out more than once that characters are married so specifically they can disregard the fact they're married as they
Yeah.
proceed to have sexual interactions with people that are not their spouses.
Mm-hmm.
I just found that very intriguing. Once again, I'm like, Ryan, what are you trying to tell us?
And it's a lot of the women cheating, no? So you've got Pearline, you've got Mary in there
Mary.
as well.
With the potential Jezebelification of Perline, I see what you're saying. I would
Mm.
have definitely liked to understand a few more things about her character, her backstory, what motivates her, especially because, again, I did consider her actor, James Lawson, to be very charismatic in the brief time she was talking.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't go as far as calling it Jezebelification because I think the movie ultimately positions her as a not harmful person. In fact,
Mm-hmm.
you won't like this, but in fact, she basically actually sacrifices herself to save Sammy right before she gets
Mm.
converted into a vampire because it's after Remmick has come in to the Duke and he's attacking Sammy and I think she stakes him from the back or something and
Mm-hmm.
then he attacks her and she gets bit. I understand there's again that criticism of the black women in this movie continuously sacrificing themselves for the men. I will say that in this movie, everybody sacrifices themselves for Sammy because the
That's
movie
true.
is trying to make a point that Sammy must survive to hold on to the legacy and his power to speak to black people across the generations. But I see the criticism there.
But notice that the light bright, Miss Mary, she doesn't have to sacrifice herself for anyone, does she?
Now, that is facts. But again, if you interpret Smoke and Stack's differences the way I do, and you consider Ryan Coogler to be using Smoke as an avatar for himself to some degree,
Mm-hmm.
you could read that as Ryan Coogler trying to preach to Black people that to pick that kind of relationship,
Mm.
which presenting as an interracial relationship, yes, you might get to enjoy certain things about how you navigate the world, but you are essentially committing yourself to a lifetime of arrested development.
Yeah.
I might be over interpreting it, but you could read it as okay, Mary doesn't get sacrificed, so she gets her happy ending, unlike the other
Mm-hmm.
Black women.
Mm-hmm.
But again, I don't think Ryan Coogler in his work tends to think a Black person being forced to exist in an assimilated society is something he considers to be a good ending.
Oh, I
He
agree.
makes a point of his characters who choose their own fates to die on their own terms and join the ancestors to be framed as a positive thing.
And that's it for now. Thank you for going deep with us this episode. Please rate and like us on Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you're streaming this from.
Thanks for listening and see you next time.